We have with us Ralph Schoellhammer from Webster University of Vienna. And hello Ralph, and we are just after the very interesting panel on migration policy. And it was very dynamic, and there were different angles how we can view the migration policy here in the European Union. And I remember you said very one interesting point about relations between people, society, and the state, and how European bureaucracy is a kind of a problem to this to solve. Not only migration problems. Yes, could you elaborate more on that?
Yes, I think this is one of the biggest problems that Europe is currently struggling with, and I would say other governments as well. And it's something we don't talk about that much anymore, is what I would call under the kind of the broad rubric of the quality of government. And what I mean by this is of governance, to be even more precise here. And what I mean by this is, are governments still capable to execute what they plan to do? Or is it very often the case that whatever plans they formulate, whatever policy they want to pursue, that it gets lost somewhere within the bureaucracy? I mean, this is not a new problem. If we look historically, this is a problem that 2.5 millennia ago, the first Chinese empires had. They built a very, very efficient bureaucracy, but at some point that bureaucracy started to atrophy, where bureaucrats kind of had their own interests. They started to have their own agenda. They wanted to prolong their influence. They wanted to prolong their existence. And this is a problem we have with bureaucracies everywhere, and the European Union is not different there. So for us, the people, quote unquote, we expect these institutions to serve a specific purpose. But these institutions themselves serve primarily their own interest, which is they want to survive, they want to stick around. So they never have the interest to really solve a problem. They just want to potentially improve it to the point where it's not yet solved, because then they can justify their continued existence. Now, this is, again, this is not a new phenomenon. Usually, and God forbid that this is going to be the solution this time, very often historically, it has been war or the existential threat to a country that changed this situation, because in such conditions, you need the best possible people. You need to actually solve the problem, because otherwise, your country, your community, your political entity disappears. Now, we see this just as a quick other example. You see this a little bit also in the Russian case. I think where the idea was, until the war in Ukraine broke out, where the Russian military was supposed to be this magnificent fighting machine, nothing in no other country, no other military can withstand. But now, as we figured out, that a lot of the things that were supposedly spent on the modernization of the Russian army, I assume that a lot of this ended up in Swiss bank accounts or the pockets of higher ranking members of the military. And it's the same thing, right? They primarily pursued their own interest because they believed that the kind of war for which they would need that investment to go actually where it was supposed to go, they probably assumed that this is never going to happen. And now you see where they ended up. And you saw the same thing happening with military support for Ukraine. Just to give you one anecdote, when Spain and Portugal announced that they will deliver their main battle tanks, their Leopard tanks, to Ukraine, and then when push came to shove, it turned out that many of them were simply not ready, right? Their maintenance was not done. They pretty much stood around in an open field and nobody looked at them. And that's the same thing, right? They put money there, but the money never went where it was supposed to go. And I think this is also something we see in the case of the European Union, that the actual capacity to solve the problems, instead of just managing them in order to justify the existence of the institutions, I think we're not there yet. And this is kind of what worries me a little bit, that these bureaucracies are very often focused with their own existence and not so much with the purpose they were actually created to solve.
So what shall we have? What shall we do? You know, we have common market, common borders. You know, we have free Schengen area, and even Austria blocked recently enlargement of the Schengen area because of migration, because they said that Bulgaria and Romania are not unfit to satisfy needs of Austria, the needs of Austrian security. Yes, so still we need kind of supranational body to somehow manage to set common standards, or
I'm not sure if we need really a supranational body for this, Because as you just pointed out, the idea of the Schengen area was that if the external borders of the European Union or of the Schengen members are safe, then it's no problem if those within the Schengen area can travel unrestricted. And I think that is still true. But of course, the Schengen idea starts to break down if these external borders are not protected. Now, my assumption would be that every country has an interest in protecting their external borders. So that, in the ideal case, should happen without any third-party institution, any EU institution in the first place. And Poland does it. I mean, to use another example, because you also mentioned the common market, I mean, we saw this when, I think it was, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think it was Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovakia, when they did or attempted to ban agricultural imports from Ukraine, which is a very, very strong EU, a strong area of EU competence, right? This is external relations and trade. This is the common market. But in this very instance, since from Poland to Bulgaria, the idea was that, which I think it was correct economically at least, that this is a threat to their domestic agricultural sector, they pretty much violated the EU regulations that they cannot do it. They tried to do it on the way, and in a sense, then the EU gave into it. So they said, we see that you're probably going to do it anyways, so we rubber stamp it so it doesn't look as if you guys would break European rules. So I think in many cases what we see is that European countries are very much capable and willing to put their national interest above a supposed supranational interest or these supranational institutions, which I think brings me to the actual answer to your question. I think a lot of the supranational ideas could be done and could be executed if you need a vast bureaucratic body to do so. That's where I'm doubtful. Take the European Parliament, for example. There is no situation at the moment under which the European Parliament can, for example, actually legislate, right? They cannot even bring in their own laws. It's not a parliament in any way, shape, or form as the Sejm in Poland or the parliaments, the Bundestag in Germany. It is in many ways a symbolic institution that is a vast, bloated bureaucratic body that at some point, I would argue, also costs a lot of money for the European taxpayers without having any true political function that resembles a parliament. Now, they do something, right? They have to approve the head of certain institutions. And so that's all fine. But it's also in many ways not really democratic, because the number of people, for example, that define one Polish parliamentarian is significantly higher than the number of people that define one Luxembourgian parliamentarian. So it's not even equal representation of the European people within the European Parliament. And this is kind of also what I mean. These are institutions that are neither designed nor capable of really serving the purpose that they claim that they do, as being the democratic face of the European Union and the guardians of democracy. I think this is, again, as we said early on in our conversation, something they claim that they are in order to justify their own existence. But if you drill a little deeper, it's the claims do not really live up to reality.
Okay, because just to comment on the event with wheat from Ukraine, yes, this was mismanagement because it was supposed that we will just transport these goods to the seaports and re-export it. It was purported for Polish market, and then someone sell it on the Polish market, and then national country need to intervene. It is nothing common with common European policy, as I understand that issue. So we need to do something because it was mismanagement of the agreement.
The mismanagement part, I think, is very true. So that is true. But the European Union did extend what pretty much resembles a free trade agreement to Ukraine. So you're correct, right? The idea was that Ukrainian agricultural products, they will transit through Poland, they will transit to Hungary, to Western Europe. But there was no specific clause in that trade agreement with Ukraine that they cannot sell. It was mismanagement. Nobody expected them to sell it in Poland or to sell it in Hungary, but it was not explicitly forbidden. So if they would have done that, you're right, if they would have done that from the beginning, if they would have said this is a special trade agreement and these 5 countries are only transit countries but will not be destination countries for Ukrainian agricultural products, then it would not have been a problem, but they didn't do this. So as you correctly said, right, so then Poland, Hungary and others were in this position that they were part of an agreement that they believed would work out differently, but when it didn't, they had to choose between saying, well, we signed the agreement, didn't work out as we expected, but we can't do anything because it's an agreement. Or they could say, we will not allow it, and we are not going to change our position, but the EU has to change its position, which then ultimately was what happened. I think you're right, it was a mismanagement. But at the end of the day, it also showed that when push comes to shove, nation states are very much capable of pushing the EU in adapting their position, which, as a quick side note, we saw this also during the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. You can say pretty much all of the financial and economic criteria were either weakened or softened or ignored by all states, right? By France and Germany, by Greece, pretty much everybody at some point could, quote unquote, do whatever they wanted to. So very often these rules are designed to prevent the problem. Then they don't prevent the problem, so we change the rules, and that's how it very often is.
Because what I'm thinking, and you mentioned that also on the panel, where EU could be very useful, and I would like you to comment on it, is that the return policy, because we were talking about that the return policy is really, really low. Yes, a number of people coming to Europe who has no right to stay here are not effectively returned. And, you know, Poland or other countries from Free Seas region don't have extensive relations with Middle East or North Africa. In example, like Spain is dealing with Morocco, yes? You can see that there is understanding and the kind of tension, of course, but also kind of cooperation. And we would like to have like a big power that can negotiate with the states that should take their citizens back, and why it's not happening. Yeah.
Well, I think the problem, as you just mentioned, right, it's not happening, and I think one of the main reasons is there isn't any kind of mechanism that or it's thought about, but there is no credible mechanism that would punish is a very strong word, but that puts pressure on these countries. That's a good word. Yes, there are no incentives for these countries to take, for example, illegal migrants or criminal migrants back. Or very often the only incentives there are financial, right? That pretty much we pay then countries to either not allow people to travel through, to transit to Europe, or to take individuals back that shouldn't have been here in the first place. I mean, this is in a sense, if you look at Turkey, right? Turkey is basically a huge cork in a bottle that Europeans are paying off to remain in place. So otherwise, there would probably have been much more migration from the Middle East if Turkey didn't make that deal with the European Union, that again costs several billions every year. And the same is true if you look at North Africa. Right? It's some like Gaddafi, the late Gaddafi. I mean, one of the things that he said was not entirely wrong. I mean, that was the argument that many of these authoritarian strongmen in the Mediterranean made. They said, we are kind of the only thing that separates Europe from a massive, massive migration wave. And what we see now, that was true. But the problem is, again, the idea is there is no willingness, and this is not just a European problem, there is no willingness to really close down borders. I think that's the major problem. And we talked about this also on the panel, that it's like water that flows through a maze, if you want, right? Water is going to go where the resistance is lowest. And people who want to migrate, independently of where they want to go, they will also go where they see the highest chance to get in and then the highest chance to stay. And in Europe, that chance is still higher than, for example, Singapore or Japan or Qatar or Saudi Arabia. Or one could even say in many ways China, right? From a purely economic perspective, right? When one says it's about improving someone's living conditions. Israel would be another example, right? So there would be other economic destinations that probably would offer similar benefits than Europe. But there's an awareness also by those who do human trafficking, kind of who do all the dirty work, the dark side, the dark underbelly of migration, they know that the chances in Europe are best. So this is where the demand is highest. And this is also where they try to get people. So it's in a sense, the migration question is not a particularly puzzling one. If you have the chance to leave your country, and if you decide to do so, you will go where you feel that the opportunities outweigh the risks. And I think Europe is still kind of the number one, in many ways, the number one destination there. I mean, again, if in Latin America, it would be the United States.
So it's like a kind of a reward-risk ratio.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's nothing else. I think we tend to very often kind of dramatize or look at this in very, very moral terms. But I think you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, this is a calculation on part of all of those who are involved. Now, this doesn't diminish the very often understandable reasons why people want to leave. But we have to keep in mind, and I suggest to every listener, to every viewer, to take a look, because the data is available. Up until the 1960s, for example, Great Britain had more inhabitants than Nigeria. In about 25 years, Nigeria will have more inhabitants than the entire European Union. So the kind of population and migration pressures that are building in certain parts of the world are beyond anything that we have experienced in the last 300, 400, 500 years. In a sense, you could even make the argument it's a reversal of what Europe went through in the 19th century. I mean, one of the reasons why there was imperialism, why there was colonialism, was because Europeans had a huge surplus of people, because due to industrialization, new hygiene standards, improvements in medicine, we had more people than we could take care of. We had, let's say, a surplus of people that we then could use to create colonies in the United States, in Australia, to do all these imperial adventures, because we simply had the manpower to do so. But one should not be surprised that if that population surplus appears in another part of the world, they also will have to move, because let's be completely honest here, Nigeria cannot feed, clothe, and support 300 million people. That's not going to be possible. They will have to move somewhere. And at the moment, I assume, and this is just one example of many, the most likely destination, or one destination, will be Europe.
So what is your outlook for the European Union? Yes, is European Union bureaucracy going to recognize now nation states' demand concerning the security in the terms of migration?
I think they will, and I think there's a lot of talk at the moment about the end of the European Union, and the European Union is going to disappear. I don't think that that's going to be the case, but I also think that the ambitious supranational project that would usher into the federal states of the United States of Europe, that project is dead at the moment, and I think it will remain dead. So I think the future of, and this is something that for us European listeners and viewers, something I think we can relate to. I think it's going to be a little bit like the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, right? That stuck around for a long time, but really didn't, towards the end of it, have significant military power. And I think this is also what we're going to see with, like, the EU institutions will stay around because they're a platform for conversations. They are good for communication among the different European countries. They are very popular as a kind of early retirement for mediocre European politicians. So this is something, so there's an interest or an incentive, as you said before, for everyone to keep these institutions around. But when it comes to the actual formulation of policies, I believe that more and more countries will either do their own thing, or you will have subgroupings among the European Union that want to do their own thing. To give you one example, like this is we talked about the 3 Cs, that's one area. We had the Visegrad group before. We have now France is now leading the so-called nuclear alliance within the European Union, which is quite different, which is, Germany, Austria, no nuclear, never, no matter what happens. And then you have Poland, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, who say we need to expand in nuclear. Then you have Italy, who has now agreed its own security partnership with India. It looks like that Italy is now pulling out of the Belt and Road with China. But you can see that these countries start to develop more and more their own foreign policies and also their own domestic policies. But will the EU stick around? Definitely, right? So this will remain around for for the very reason, and now we go full circle to the beginning of our conversation, because institutions and bureaucracies have a tendency to prolong their own life, right? This is kind of, they want to stick around, they want to maintain relevant, so they will do whatever they can to stick around. But will they still be the kind of influential body they were in the past? I don't think so. And as two last points on this, we see it now. In order for it to be capable of doing more, you probably would have to change the decision-making process. Like this is, for example, something that Germany and France are pushing for. But there is not enough identity, social, cultural cohesion within Europe. For example, for, let's say, Austrians, Czechs, and Poles to accept, particularly in all areas of foreign policy, a majority decision then of Spain, Italy, France, and Germany. I think that's not going to happen. So it's either it has to be unanimous, otherwise these countries, and all countries, and the same the other way around. Can you imagine? Let's assume Ukraine becomes an EU member, which I don't think they ever will, but let's assume it hypothetically. And then Poland, Ukraine, and some other states want to do something that the French and the Germans don't want to do, that they will just say, well, we have been outvoted.
Sure, we have recent examples, from 2015, Germany acting on their own and not asking anyone. We have also Germany dealing with Russia without not neglecting all the warnings coming from the East, and how now we should accept that common decision making without when our voice will be disregarded.
Yeah, and that's you're absolutely right. And you saw it. I mean, this is what everyone thinks about Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, but you're absolutely right. I mean, this was a direct circumvention of European partners in order to build better relations with a non-European, let's say, not particularly trustworthy state. Because the idea still is, and this is something that particularly Paris and Berlin will have to come to grips with, there is the idea that there is a hierarchy within the European Union. And that it's, it's Germany and France on top, and then comes everybody else. And I think this is just no longer going to work. I mean, take one example. We are here in Poland. How can you, as Germans, demand, let's say, allegiance from Poland when Poland spends more on its military, has a larger military, is probably more powerful in military terms? Right? At some point, Poland is going to say, why exactly would you tell us what to do? When we are the ones who have the actual military, kind of the military capacity. And also economically, I believe that the gap is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Like Germany is deindustrializing, but Poland is not. So and these tensions will become more pronounced in the future. So as I said, will the EU stick around? Yes. But will the supranational, so as a more an international body? Oh, absolutely. Right? Like the OECD, like these exactly, but diluted. But the idea that, and we see this also now, but the idea that somebody in Brussels can, let's say, tell Poland or Hungary what their laws on marriage are supposed to look like. I think these things will end very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you for your interesting discussion with you, and thank you for your comments and for today's wonderful panel.
Thank you for your time.
3Cs 1 Opportunity Conference. Thank you.
Thank you.